Today's topic is biophilic design, and specifically with water, with the idea that we have an opportunity to create healthy and healing infrastructure using the tools of biophilic design. So what is biophilic design? It came from the hypothesis of biophilia, which was evolved by E.O. Wilson and Eric Fromm as an assumption that humans have an innate biological affinity for the natural world, love of life or living systems, and the connections that we subconsciously seek with the rest of life. I see this as the opposite of a phobia. This is a love of living systems. And biophilic design uses that same hypothesis, but applies it to one step further, to reference nature in both obvious and subtle ways, in the ways that we design our own habitats as humans, our buildings, our landscapes, our places, our homes. There are some specific goals of biophilic design that also relate to this health and healing aspect. And so there's a measurability associated with designing with biophilic principles in mind, such as increasing overall well-being, health and happiness, enhancing creativity, focus, and even immunity, while reducing stress. For me, all of those things sound really good right about now, and is perhaps what is needed. The other way to look at biophilic design, I think, and to many people, is that it's rediscovering what is intuitively obvious to us. If you have had any chance lately to get outside and connect with nature, I suspect you have a sense of what I'm talking about. I'm going to reference a bit of work today by Dr. Stephen Kellert, who was a professor at Yale. He passed away in 2016, but he was one of the early luminaries of biophilic design. And I'm going to be sharing actually some of his slides that he lent to me not long before he passed. And so some of this is coming directly from his work that I've updated with some images. But part of our goal as designers at Biohabitats is to really hit at the sustainability of our cultures and to focus on sustainability. And I think his perspective here is that biophilic design helps get us there, and that regenerating the human spirit, fostering health, and inspiring stewardship are central to creating that culture of sustainability. It's not just about solar panels and water harvesting, even though I love that stuff too. And so why is biophilic design important? There are a lot of reasons that have been put forth in that we spend a lot of time indoors, even maybe more so right now. 80% of the population lives in urban areas where we have more limited access to green space. Children have been measured and indicated to spend less than 40 minutes on average outside each day. There's a lot of stresses, particularly now, even so, more so environmental degradation, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And yet on the other side of this, we as humans evolved our minds, our bodies, our senses in natural and not constructed worlds. And so they are at odds. And so biophilic design has a few tenets of shifting the way we think about design to be more aligned with us in that natural world and how we evolved. And so one of the first tenets is that we need to design for people as part of nature. Our design should be integrated with the functions of place and ecosystems, and absolutely should set goals such as creating inspirational, restorative, and healthy spaces. Biophilic design is relevant also in that we can create settings where connections to nature are accessible, recurrent, that's important, and engaging. Like there's some consistency to that. This is one of our projects in Washington, D.C. at a middle school at the Sidwell Friends School. And this is an integrated stormwater and wastewater system where the students are able to sample the stormwater ponds and have access to this greenery and water right in the front of their campus. Also, biophilic design appreciates that most sustainable designs, if we're looking at sustainability, is that their goal is to satisfy a multiplicity of inherent human values. And so we're not able to pull apart some of those pieces. So health and well-being start to become integrated into sustainability. And we're really talking about, design for overall well-being of everybody. And a primary objective is to create good habitat for people as biological animals. So many of our buildings and our landscapes don't recognize that we are making habitat. So again, from Dr. Kellert, one of his 5 highlights here is that biophilic design encourages ecologically connected, mutual reinforcing, and integrated design solutions. And so above all, biophilic design must nurture a love of place. And so there's a lot of opportunities for that. And there are some good resources that are listed in the handout and that I'll share on a slide at the end that go into the details of how to do this. And most of it has been focused on the architectural world, but it's applicable more broadly. And the 3 main elements of incorporating biophilic design are things like bringing nature into the space, so more plants or the presence of water, using natural analogs, mimicking shapes from nature, and then also the nature of the space, how we play with openness and refuge and prospect. There are measurable improvements that some of them have been published in this particular guidebook I have on the screen right now in reducing stress, in enhancing cognitive performance, mental focus, and then adapting to emotion, mood, and preferences. There's some of the early research was around like hospitals and healthcare and encouraging, better results even when people had access to even just a window. Much of the biophilic design world has been applied to buildings, which makes sense since we're inside so frequently. So a few examples of that, just some fun eye candy to give a sense of what that can look like. Artists like Chihuly, spaces and even like Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, and even parks and open spaces. And that's what I wanted to spend the bulk of the examples today showing some ways that we can use open spaces and leverage water and leverage our water infrastructure to hit on those biophilic design goals just beyond the building itself, or maybe sometimes on the periphery of the building. And so there's been some additional research, even here published by the USDA and U.S. Forest Service, headed by an MD, about the idea even that there are ways to restore the commons within urban settings too, to create health and well-being, and that there's a health impact to that. And so while we can continue and should continue to do that with open space, we also have a need to manage stormwater and to reinvest in our infrastructure in a lot of these places. And so that's where we see the intersection, where that water infrastructure can become part of that biophilic design and open space leverage to create healthier places. And so we see water infrastructure as a biophilic opportunity. If you've worked with us before, you'll know that one of our main expertise is using like natural treatment wetlands and living ecologically engineered systems. That is a specialty, but we also like to expand the concept around infrastructure so that we are looking at opportunities to expose it and help people become more aware of it in general. And so there's a few opportunities I'm going to show today, including like ways that we think you can do this and that we've seen and that we've done, and that certainly are ripe for expanding. And so that includes waterfronts and water features, stormwater and stormwater infrastructure, and wastewater treatment. And so I'm going to run through a few project examples, spend a few minutes on this, and then we'll open it up for questions. So in terms of waterfronts, our main office is in Baltimore, and we have a long-term presence there in the Inner Harbor. With the National Aquarium, we've helped them develop this plan and are piloting the first phases and preparing the designs for the full build-out to transform this post-industrial urban waterfront canal that is almost devoid of life by installing a floating tidal marsh that will increase the ecological function, but also provide greenery and access to nature for people in the city and refuge for animals and fish and turtles and birds. And so we've been running a pilot there that they've been studying for the last 2 years or so, and we'll be scaling that up across the entire canal. Similarly, in both Baltimore and Washington, D.C., we have installations creating these living canals and floating wetlands that have community engagement opportunities, working with plants, and providing this green space while doubling as infrastructure to increase the ecological habitat value for fish who've been just, fish and other creatures who've been spaced out of these hard-edged, polluted urban waterfronts. Stormwater, as a water feature is a great resource. This is an example for a city block long stormwater recirculating feature that is fed entirely from rainwater in Portland, Oregon. And this creates a moving, visible, audible sense of water that people walk over to and from the buildings, and that is also treating stormwater and is fed completely from harvested water. This project in Washington, D.C. is for an art museum. And so coming to appreciate art, you are also introduced to this courtyard, which is a beautiful water feature, but the whole thing is designed as an ecological filter also, where we're able to use the system itself to filter and clean the water and minimize chemicals while providing this beautiful aesthetic amenity for people to connect with while they're there, enjoying the art. The system was designed, like I had said, with the idea of trying to hybridize and improve the way that we manage water systems and really lean on the ecological. We can also integrate more sources than just stormwater, but leverage all of those together in a built environment setting. So this is a project at the Engineered Biosystems building at Georgia Tech, where we're integrating water reuse with rainwater, harvested condensate, groundwater, and stormwater features to create a recirculating water system that also provides habitat, cooling, heat island, reducing the heat island effect, and an opportunity for students to see the water that otherwise would have all just gone down the drain, because all of those would have been considered nuisance or, wasted water that wasn't, appropriate to bring onto the site. But it's one of the most beautiful spots on that campus. There are also plenty of simple opportunities of integrating green stormwater infrastructure into retrofits in urban and suburban areas, where we can be, planting with native species and flowering species, bringing these right even to people's doorsteps, while also managing stormwater, right? And so these are pretty common, but we think that there's a biophilic design opportunity too if we start to look for that. From a wastewater perspective, that's where things get interesting, because we have a lot of nutrients to work with, and plants love that. And so this particular example was designed with biophilic design in mind from the start, using this is a 52,000 gallon a day wastewater treatment plant in upstate New York at the Omega Institute, where the whole idea was to be able to bring people around and give them the experience of being close to the plants and seeing the infrastructure and having this beautiful space to be in. Chatham University's Eden Hall campus outside of Pittsburgh took that to the campus scale, and this is where we have an entire treatment system that you walk through and around as you go to class or come in through the main gates. We're treating all of the wastewater using treatment wetlands, but we're also focusing on water reuse for toilet flushing and removing nutrients, and providing this very lush experience that goes beyond just landscape or planted open space. It's functional, and was designed very intentionally to bring your attention to it and to create this oasis feeling. And then finally, the last one is at a different scale that I thought was interesting too, because we can actually harvest and harness the power of nature and the design of nature at a larger scale to create places of refuge for people. So this is a retrofit of 90 acres of former sewage lagoon outside of Portland, Oregon in Fern Hill, to polish that treatment effluent from a treatment system before it enters the river, but to also create bird habitat and to create a place for people and for recreation and to be. And so I looked it up, and it has its own TripAdvisor page, and these are some quotes from there of people really experiencing this as a place to meditate and walk and enjoy the bird habitat. But it's also a piece of big natural treatment system infrastructure to cool and filter the water. So there's opportunities to integrate that biophilic design piece can go at all the different scales. And the way we see that is that we can bring the kind of best of the biophilic design world that's been adapted for buildings and start to look at it for infrastructure and for landscapes and for birds, and creating that habitat opportunity for designing for clean water, not just to be a sustainable solution, but to also benefit people, benefit wildlife, and reduce the carbon footprint and create an overall win-win situation. But I think biophilic design has that opportunity to knit those together with the health piece, which has not always been in the conversation. So in the handout, you have a copy of this, but I did want to share just a few resources around biophilic design, most of which I referenced today and in building this. And so they're from a wide variety of folks, including the Living Building Challenge and International Living Future Institute, who has guidelines for how to integrate biophilic design into your projects and with your teams, which is a very powerful process. I've been able to participate in that. And they've published a book, Creating Biophilic Buildings. There's some films and some other guidebooks. So lots to dig into there. And so thank you. We'll open up the questions.
Great. Thanks, Erin, for that intro into biophilia and biophilic design. Great to see so many neat examples. Just as a reminder to everyone to use your question tab to type in questions, and we'll try to summarize a few and get some dialogue going. Wondering, Erin, maybe to kick us off, is there a way that you've seen, a compelling way that you've seen kind of an integrated design team integrate biophilic design or biophilic principles at the beginning of a project, and maybe share some compelling ways of doing that?
Sure. That's the best way to do it. Thank you, whoever asked that question, because starting from here is not only a way, I think, to create a compelling project, but it's also a way to create a compelling team and a relationship of people to one another, because it really does take buy-in from everybody. And in surprising places, you'll find observations that are really powerful. And so creating a biophilic project is also about creating a team who is able to think and work differently together. And so certainly the best example I've seen of this is at Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh. They are on their 4th living building, and over the last year and a half, 2 years or so, we've been working on a biophilic design process that started at day 1, along with a regenerative design process of engaging their whole stakeholder team on the principles of biophilia and biophilic design and direct experience. And there's, I think, probably a few folks who've been involved with that here. Very skilled facilitators, very, adventurous and amazing client group to assemble that. And so I think the best way to go forward is to really look at this at the beginning and to look at it earnestly and authentically, and bring in somebody who knows how to facilitate that biophilic design process and to get people connected around what it means and to have those direct experiences. It revolutionizes the design process.
So with different projects and having kind of increased vegetative component, are there additional maintenance issues or costs associated with projects that incorporate vegetation or vegetated infrastructure like you've shown?
So that's a toss-up, because in some cases, yes, and in other cases, not necessarily, because conventional gray infrastructure, which is often hidden away or off-site somewhere, can have substantial maintenance and operation and energy and carbon budgets associated with it. So it depends. But when you do take those systems onto your own site, you are increasing your own responsibility for managing and maintaining them. But, and also, integrating the water infrastructure into your landscape doesn't necessarily create that much more maintenance if you were already planning on having some landscape. And so a lot of these systems are analogous to gardens. And so there is some maintenance and operations associated with maintaining any sort of landscaping. And so why not maintain something that's also providing you clean water and habitat and educational interpretive value? It will probably be a little bit more than, a piece of mown grass, yes, but so are the benefits. And so that's something that I think is still evolving, but that's the way we see it, is that it's not like an either or. It's like, how do we replace what we might have done otherwise, like the Sidwell project on the screen here with the kids with the net. That water infrastructure is the landscape. That is what they maintain.
That's great. Thank you. There's a bunch of questions. Trying to summarize a couple, so keep them coming. There are a few questions on health and safety concerns. So I think around treating stormwater or even wastewater in the landscape. You mentioned projects like Sidwell Friends or other places which are treating wastewater at a school. And so can you talk about those issues?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, if we're aiming to create healthy infrastructure, we don't want people to get sick from it. And so that is a very important consideration. And it's one that many people, ourselves included, have worked over the years to determine what those best practices look like from a design perspective. And so generally speaking, we want to minimize the contact with water that could be contaminated and anything in that water that could be contaminated with anybody around it. And so the Sidwell project, for example, there's no wastewater exposed. It's all beneath surfaces and not available to even touch or walk into. The stormwater there is available. That's what they're sampling. And they are using basic, common sense and not letting kids drink the water and, using some education around that. But of course, if you're contemplating these kinds of things, we have to work that through with the regulatory folks and with your own on-site, maintenance and health and safety folks to make sure that we maintain the systems with no surface water. We don't allow like mosquitoes to develop and that kind of thing. But it is possible, but it has to be done right.
Great. There are a couple of questions about scale, and so maybe on opposite ends of the spectrum. One question was about kind of designing living machines at a residential scale, and then another question was about, are there examples of cities or regions that are kind of leading or visionary with smart policies, incentives to kind of promote the biophilic design principles?
So scale. So if you're going for biophilic interventions, a living machine at a residential site will be probably like the highest bar that you could set, and would not be probably something we would recommend, just because there's a lot of maintenance associated with just a single little house. However, being able to use your gray water is a simpler thing. So there are some, at the single household scale, I would have a little bit of reservations about building something like in a greenhouse. But, basic water reuse is absolutely feasible, and it might be more appropriate to look at rainwater harvesting for a little water feature or something that brings that feeling, but doesn't have necessarily all the maintenance and the liability of just a single house owner. From a scale perspective, I'm going to have to go with Pittsburgh, which is my hometown, mostly because I've been familiar with what FIPS has been doing there to really bring workshops and conferences and bring attention to this biophilic design process. They've been making films and sharing that. FIPS Conservatory is a place where people go to connect with plants and have for a very long time, so it's a really good fit, and they've catalyzed that. There are likely other places, but that happens to be the one I'm most familiar with.
Great. There's a couple questions on integrating these principles into kind of challenging environments. I think both from the perspective of challenging environments in the landscape, and then maybe socioeconomic challenges. How do we have this type of work integrated in communities, in historically disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so we have just a few minutes, so I'll make this brief, but I'm happy to continue that conversation because I think that's a really important piece, and perhaps where the potential is the greatest to increase the health and well-being of the people who live there are in the economically disadvantaged urbanized areas where access to nature and the knowledge of how to do that and the car to get to it is the most limiting, right? And so I think that stormwater is probably one of the best opportunities to overlay in those situations versus a wastewater treatment system. And the reason is that stormwater um, is the key, I think, in a lot of places to solving a couple problems, including often these areas are highly urbanized and don't have a lot of space for water to sink back into the ground. And so investing in stormwater green infrastructure that can also double as a park and that can also, or even as pocket parks, and that can increase the tree cover and even having, more birds, more canopy, all of those things pulled together can create even just small moments of being able to be connected to green space. And there is some really interesting published research about how that can decrease depression rates and increase happiness. Just very basic, tree planting in small parks. And so coupling that up with the stormwater piece, which is highly relevant in many areas that have combined sewers and they're struggling, I think is the place to look for it. So some of those examples I showed from Baltimore are absolutely in areas that we have, no green space and are looking at, the waterfronts as perhaps one of the best opportunities there to kind of bring some of that. But I think that's a really good question and a really key piece of it.
Great, thanks. And I think we're close to being time. Do you have any final thoughts or parting words for folks?
I, as an engineer, have been really impacted by discovering biophilic design and the whole biophilia work over the last 20 years or so. And I think seeing folks like Phipps and other projects that are embracing the living building challenge, but also that are just wanting to create more opportunity for people to feel better about the projects that they're building. I think it's one of the most important things as designers that we can find our way to it. And it gives a lot of meaning, I think, to our project teams too, when we expand the dialogue around what's important when we're starting to design for people as part of nature, and we're designing for people to be better and to feel better. And I think coming out of this whole coronavirus pandemic thing, it's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity to look at what we do and what we do differently, and to focus on that health and well-being and getting people out of these chronic health conditions. The built environment can be one part of that. So I think if there's an infrastructure spending bill and there's opportunities to reimagine how we're creating healthy spaces, this is the way to do it.